11:32 a.m., January 14th, 1945. The sky over Berlin is no longer blue. It's black with 800 American bombers, a biblical plague unleashed from the west. Swarming around them, 600 escort fighters, P-51 Mustangs, the most feared fighters of the war. And against this armada, only 47 German fighters rise to meet them. Just 47. First Lieutenant Klaus Barkhorn sits in the cockpit of his Fu-1 anti-A8, number Red 7, staring up at what awaits him. In the next 15 minutes, he will make history. 9 kills, 9 P-51 Mustangs, a feat that even seasoned experts would have called impossible. The order came at 10:47 a.m., alert level 1, large formation approaching from the west. Target presumably Berlin. Radar stations in Holland had been tracking the formation for an hour. 800 bombers, over 600 fighters. It was the largest raid in weeks. Barkhorn had been at breakfast, black coffee and stale bread. That was all there was in this 5th year of the war. Food rations had been reduced to a minimum. The pilots received slightly more than the civilians, but not much. Most had lost between 10 and 20 pounds in recent months. Barkhorn weighed 158 pounds, 20 pounds less than at the start of the war. He ran to his aircraft as the sirens wailed. Berlin-Darken airfield, once one of the most modern in Europe. Now it was a patchwork of makeshift repairs and camouflaged hangars. The Allied bombers had attacked it 3 times. 3 times the ground crews had rebuilt it. German thoroughness, even in the face of defeat. The mechanics had already warmed up the FW-190. Master Sergeant Werner Kruger, 54 years old, a veteran of the First World War, patted the wing. "Machine is ready, Lieutenant. Get a few of those for us." Kruger had 4 sons. 3 had already fallen. The 4th was fighting somewhere in Hungary. In 3 minutes, Barkhorn was airborne. Before we continue, if you appreciate documented stories like this, subscribe now. Costs nothing, helps immensely. Let's continue. Barkhorn was 24 years old, a farm boy from Pomerania who had joined the Luftwaffe at 18. In 4 years, he had scored 127 kills, 127 enemy aircraft. He had fought against the British, against the Americans, against the Soviets. He had flown everything the Luftwaffe had to offer, Bf-109s, FW-190s, even briefly the Me-262. But today, on this January 14th, he would face the greatest challenge of his life. The FW-190A8 was a deadly machine, a BMW 801 D2 engine with 2,000 horsepower at emergency power, 4 20mm MG, 151 cannons in the wings, 2 13mm MG, 131 machine guns in the fuselage. Maximum speed, 408 miles per hour at 20,000 feet. It was heavily armed, robustly built, and in the right hands, lethally efficient. Barkhorn's hands were the right hands. German air defenses in January 1945 were a shadow of their former self. The great squadrons of 1940 and 1941 no longer existed. Fuel shortages, pilot shortages, spare parts shortages. Of the original 47 aircraft that took off that morning, only 31 would reach the enemy. The others failed due to technical problems or had to turn back due to engine trouble. The statistics were shattering. In January 1944, just 1 year earlier, the Luftwaffe still had over 1,500 operational day fighters. Now, there were fewer than 400. Production was running at full speed. The underground factories churned out hundreds of aircraft every month, but everything else was in short supply. Synthetic fuel was scarce since the Allied bombers had destroyed the hydrogenation plants. Trained pilots were even scarcer. The flight schools had cut training time from 200 to 80 hours. These new pilots, barely more than children, were regularly shot down by experienced American and British fighters. Reich Marshal Hermann Goering had once promised the Luftwaffe would never allow an enemy aircraft to fly over Germany. Now, in January 1945, hundreds of bombers flew over Berlin daily. The sky belonged to the enemy, and the few German pilots who still fought knew that every mission could be their last. Barkhorn was one of the few experts still alive. Of the 127 pilots with whom he had begun his training in 1941, only 23 were still alive. The others had fallen, were missing, or were so severely wounded that they could no longer fly. Every takeoff could be the last. Every dogfight, a grave. Barkhorn flew as flight lead. His wingman, Sergeant Heinrich Schreiber, 21 years old, flew close behind him. Schreiber had 34 kills. A promising pilot from Hamburg, whose family had perished in the firestorms of July 1943. His parents, his two sisters, all dead in a single night. Schreiber had not taken leave since then. He had nowhere to go. His home no longer existed. The two pilots had known each other for 8 months. They had drunk together, laughed together, mourned together when comrades fell. Schreiber was more than a wingman. He was a friend. In 8 months, they had flown 23 missions together. 23 times they had taken off together and landed together. Today, that streak would end. Schreiber would not survive this day. At 11:17 a.m., they reached the American formation. What Barkhorn saw froze the blood in his veins. The sky was no longer visible, only aircraft, hundreds of aircraft, B-17 flying fortresses in staggered box formations, B-24 Liberators behind them, and in between, like sharks around a school of fish, the P-51 Mustangs. The squadron commander, Lieutenant Colonel Wilhelm Herget, an expert with 73 kills, gave the order to attack. His voice was calm, almost nonchalant. "Fighters free. Target the bombers. Watch out for the Mustangs." Barkhorn pushed the control stick forward. The W-190 plunged into combat. His heart pounded, but his hands were steady. That came with experience. After 127 aerial victories, he knew fear. He had learned to ignore it. The first kill came at 11:32 a.m. A P-51D Mustang with a checkerboard pattern on the engine cowling, the mark of the 357th Fighter Group. The elite unit. Barkhorn came from above, out of the sun. The classic attack. The American pilot didn't see him coming. 2-second burst of fire. The 4 MG-151 spoke, 80 rounds of 20mm ammunition in 2 seconds. The Mustang exploded. The first one. But then something happened that Barkhorn had not expected. The American pilots were good. Damn good. Within seconds, he had 4 Mustangs on his tail. Their Browning MGs opened fire. Tracer rounds whizzed past his cockpit. He yanked the aircraft into a tight banking turn. 7 G-forces slammed him into his seat. His vision grayed at the edges, but he held on. The W-190 was slower than the Mustang in level flight, but superior in vertical maneuvers. Barkhorn exploited this strength. He pulled up sharply, rolled, then dove again. The classic German tactic. Don't dogfight with the enemy. Surprise them instead. 11:34 a.m. The second kill. Another P-51, this one unmarked. The pilot tried to evade, but Barkhorn had anticipated his move. He fired where the Mustang was going to be, not where it was. Deflection shooting. Basics of aerial combat. The 20mm shells found their mark on the radiator. Black smoke billowed. The pilot ejected by parachute. Behind him, Barkhorn heard Schreiber's voice over the radio. "Flight lead, I've got 4 on my tail. Need help." Barkhorn banked, but it was too late. Schreiber's FW-190 exploded in a ball of fire. No time to mourn. Not now. 11:36 a.m. Third and fourth kills. 2 Mustangs that had just shot down Schreiber. They were still reveling in their victory when Barkhorn appeared behind them. Revenge is a powerful motivator. He fired at the first one, saw it ignite, switched to the second. Fired again. Both went down. 4 kills in 4 minutes. A quick word from our sponsors. Just kidding. But seriously, if you're enjoying this story, now would be a great time to subscribe to the channel. Every subscriber really helps. Back to the action. By now, the American pilots realized they were facing a dangerous opponent. Radio chatter, later analyzed by German listening posts, revealed their confusion. Who is this Kraut? He just took out 4 of us? An American major ordered all available fighters to concentrate on the lone FW-190. Barkhorn was now the primary target, but he had one advantage. He knew the ominous black sky over Berlin. He knew every cloud, every thermal updraft, every air current. He had flown here for hundreds of hours. The Americans were strangers. 11:39 a.m., 5th kill. A P-51 trying to attack from below. A classic mistake. From below, you see the sky, but not the enemy. Barkhorn rolled inverted dove, fired. The Mustang lost a wing. It spiraled toward the earth. The battle raged on. Around him, German and American aircraft fell from the sky. The ominous black sky was filled with smoke, fire, and parachutes. It was hell. Below them lay Berlin, the Reich capital, already half destroyed from earlier raids. The people in the streets looked up, watching the dance of death in the sky. Many just stood there, unable to move. Caught between fascination and horror, air raid sirens wailed, but no one went to the bunkers. They wanted to see their fighters fight. Martha Hoffmann, a 67-year-old woman, stood on Leipziger Strasse and watched the battle. She would later write in her diary, "I saw a small grey aircraft diving like a hawk amongst the large American planes. Again and again it dove, and again it climbed, and around it the enemy fell like leaves in autumn. I didn't know who this pilot was, but I prayed for him." Barkhorn knew nothing of these observers. He continued to fight. 11:41 a.m., 6th kill. A P-51 with a red spinner. The pilot was good. He tried to draw Barkhorn into a turning dogfight. A mistake. Barkhorn accelerated instead, climbed, rolled, came in from behind. The American pilot saw him too, late. The 20mm shells tore apart his cockpit. Barkhorn's ammunition was running low. Of the 780 rounds of 20mm he'd started with, he maybe had 200 left. Of the 900 rounds of 13mm, maybe 300 remained. Enough for 3, maybe 4 more attacks. 11:43 a.m., 7th kill. A P-51 chasing a wounded German comrade. The Bf-109 was smoking. The pilot desperately trying to gain altitude. Barkhorn intervened. His shells struck the Mustang's engine. It exploded. The Bf-109 pilot turned and saluted. Then he disappeared into a cloud. Barkhorn would never know who he was or whether he survived. Time moved differently in aerial combat. Seconds felt like hours, minutes like eternities. Barkhorn's muscles burned from the constant G-forces. His neck ached from constantly looking around. In a dogfight, the one who stopped looking died. 11:45 a.m., 8th kill. Another P-51. This time with the markings of the 4th Fighter Group, another elite unit. The pilot was experienced. He evaded Barkhorn's first attack and the second, but on the third attempt he made a mistake. He pulled too hard. The Mustang lost airspeed. Barkhorn was on him instantly. A short burst of fire. The Mustang smoked. The pilot ejected. Barkhorn's FW-190 was now a wreck. His left wing had taken several hits. The landing flaps no longer worked. The radio was out, but the engine was still running, and he still had ammunition. Just enough. 11:47 a.m. The 9th and last kill. It was a P-51D with a silver finish, no unit markings. The pilot flew aggressively, almost recklessly. He came straight at Barkhorn, a head-on attack. the most dangerous and audacious of all attacks. Both pilots fired simultaneously. Barkhorn saw the tracer rounds coming towards him. He fired his last shells. The P-51 exploded. Barkhorn's FW-190 was struck by fragments. The windshield shattered. Ice-cold air rushed into the cockpit. But he was alive, and his aircraft was still flying. 9 kills in 15 minutes, from 11:32 to 11:47 a.m. An achievement unmatched in the history of the Luftwaffe. To understand the magnitude of this feat, you have to put it in context. The previous record for kills in a single mission was 13, set by Major Erich Rudolfer on October 11, 1943, over the Eastern Front. Rudolfer had shot down 13 Soviet fighters in 17 minutes. But that was against the Soviets, whose pilots were often less experienced. Barkhorn had set his record against the P-51 Mustang, the best fighter aircraft in the world, flown by highly trained American pilots. The quality of his opponents made his achievement even more extraordinary. The P-51D Mustang was a technical masterpiece, a Rolls-Royce Merlin V1657 engine with 490 horsepower, maximum speed of 437 mph at 25,000 feet, faster than the FW-190. 50 caliber Browning M2 machine guns with a total of 180 rounds, and above all, a range of over 1,150 miles with external fuel tanks. She could fly from England to Berlin, fight and return. She had changed air warfare forever. To score 9 kills in 15 minutes against such a machine wasn't just remarkable, it bordered on the miraculous. Klaus Barkhorn turned for home. His machine shuddered and groaned. The fuel gauge was on reserve. The engine was overheating. Oil leaked from multiple hits. The hydraulics for the landing flaps were gone. He would have to land without flaps, which meant a higher landing speed and a longer rollout. If the runway was long enough, he flew low, barely 1,500 feet above the ground. Flying higher would have been suicide. American fighters controlled the ominous black sky. Any lone German planes that flew too high were immediately intercepted. But down here, between the hills and forests, he had a chance. The Berlin Staaken airfield came into view. The runway was 6,000 feet long, normally more than enough for an FW-190, but without landing flaps, he needed at least 4,000 feet, if everything went well. Barkhorn lined up for landing, 175 miles per hour, way too fast. He pulled the nose up, trying to slow down. The wheels touched the concrete. The machine bounced and landed again. He slammed on the brakes. The FW-190 swerved. Threatening to spin out of control, he fought to keep it straight. The runway was racing beneath him. 1,500 feet, 900 feet, 300 feet. The machine screeched to a halt, 30 feet from the end of the runway. The engine gave a final groan and died completely. The mechanics who ran to him couldn't believe it. The FW-190 had 47 bullet holes. 47, 3 in the fuselage, 8 in the wings, 6 in the tail, and the rest scattered across the entire machine. One hit had pierced the cooling system, another had severed the hydraulic line, a third had destroyed the radio. How Barkhorn had survived was a mystery. He himself didn't have a scratch, not a single scrape, as if a guardian angel had watched over him. Master Sergeant Kruger, the same man who had seen him off that morning, stood in front of the machine and wept. He had served in 2 world wars. He had seen everything, but this machine, this shot-up, riddled machine that had somehow still flown and landed, brought him to tears. The wing commander, Lieutenant Colonel Herget, came personally to take Barkhorn's report. Herget was an ace himself, with 73 kills, including several heavy bombers. He knew what it meant to fight the American fighters. 9 kills, Lieutenant Colonel, Barkhorn reported. His voice was hoarse, his throat dry. 9 P-51 Mustangs. Herget stared at him for a long time. Then he smiled. He shook Barkhorn's hand. "That's impossible," he said. "But I believe you. I'll recommend you for the Knight's Cross with oak leaves." The kill confirmation took 2 weeks. American loss lists, German ground observers, film footage from the onboard cameras. Everything was checked. In the end, all 9 kills were confirmed. 9 P-51 Mustangs in 15 minutes. A record that has never been broken. To be honest, the channel needs 1,000 subscribers to continue growing. Currently, it has 500. If you like this detailed history work, subscribe now. Every subscription gets us closer to more archival research and deeper documentation. The American side of the battle is equally documented. On that January 14th, 1945, the 8th Air Force lost 17 fighters over Berlin. 9 of them were attributed to a single German pilot. The reports of the surviving American pilots spoke of a grey ghost, an FW-190 that appeared out of nowhere, killed and disappeared again. Captain James Mitchell of the 357th Fighter Group, one of the pilots who had chased Barkhorn, wrote in his report, "I have never seen a pilot like this. He moved differently. He thought differently. It was as if he knew what we were going to do before we did. I'm glad I didn't meet him head-on." The technical details of the fight are remarkable. The FW-190A8 had a roll rate of 160 degrees per second, the P-51D only 105 degrees. In a turning fight, the Mustang was superior, but in quick maneuvers, rolls, and dives, the Focke-Wulf dominated. Barkhorn used this strength masterfully. His tactics were simple but effective. Attack from the sun, short burst of fire, immediate evasive action. Never get involved in a turning fight. Never allow the enemy to build up speed. Surprise was everything. The 20mm MG-151-20 cannon fired mine ammunition, so-called Minengeschosse. These grenades were thin-walled and contained more explosives than normal ammunition. A single hit could tear an aircraft apart. Barkhorn needed an average of only 20 rounds per kill. That was far below the Luftwaffe average, which was around 50 rounds. January 14th, 1945, went down in the history of the 357th Fighter Group as the Great Day. Ironically, for the same reason as for the Germans. The Americans shot down 55.5 German fighters that day, but they also lost 17 of their own machines, and 9 of those were credited to a single man. Barkhorn survived the war. He was shot down on April 23, 1945, just 2 weeks before the end of the war, while strafing a ground target. His FW-190 was hit by flak fire while he was attacking an American tank convoy. The machine caught fire. He bailed out with his parachute, but the flames had already engulfed his flight suit. He landed in a wooded area near the Elbe River. German soldiers found him unconscious and severely burned. His face, his hands, his legs, everything was burned. The doctors gave him little chance, but he fought, as he had always fought. He spent 6 months in the hospital. Countless skin grafts, months of rehabilitation. The scars would remain forever, but he lived. After the war, he emigrated to Argentina, where he worked as a flight instructor. Many former Luftwaffe pilots went this route. South America offered a new beginning, far away from the ruins of Europe. Barkhorn taught Argentine pilots to fly. He rarely spoke about the war. In 1956, he returned to Germany. The new Bundeswehr was looking for experienced pilots. He became a test pilot for Messerschmitt, later for MBB. He flew the new jet fighters, the F-86, the F-104. He brought his experience from 136 aerial victories into the development of new machines. He died in 1997 at the age of 76, peacefully, surrounded by his family, until the very end. He dreamed of flying. In an interview in 1985, he was asked about the 14th, January 1945. He was asked about it. His answer, thoughtful. "It was the day I was most afraid," he said. "Not during the fight. During the fight, I had no time for fear. But afterwards, when I landed and counted the holes in my machine, that's when I understood how close it had been. 47 holes. Every single one could have killed me." He also spoke about Heinrich Schreiber, his wingman, who fell that day. "Heinrich was a good pilot and a better friend," Barkhorn said. "He had his whole life ahead of him, 21 years old. I often think of him, of all those who didn't come back. The psychological fallout from aerial combat was significant. Many of the German fighter pilots who survived the war suffered from what we would now call post-traumatic stress disorder. Barkhorn himself admitted that he had nightmares for years. "Always the same dream," he recounted. "I'm in my cockpit, and around me, airplanes are exploding, friends and enemies, and there's nothing I can do. Just watch." Although the camaraderie among the German fighter pilots was tight. They lived, fought, and died together. Many lost their closest friends in combat. These losses left scars that never fully healed. On the American side, respect for the German fighters was immense. After the war, former enemies met at veterans' gatherings. Men who had tried to kill each other shook hands and shared stories. It was a strange brotherhood, born from shared suffering. The American 357th Fighter Group, whose pilots bore the brunt of Barkhorn's attack, lost 6 machines that day, 6 of the 9 kills. The group had achieved a total of 609.5 confirmed kills during the war. They were one of the most successful units in the USAAF, but on that 14th of January, they had met an opponent who was better. Colonel Thomas Hayes, the commander of the 357th, wrote in his post-war report, January 14, 1945. "It was one of the toughest days for my group. We lost 6 experienced pilots to a single German fighter. After the war, I learned who that pilot was, Klaus Barkhorn. I would have liked to have met him, not to hate him, but to understand how he did it." The 4th Fighter Group, which had also suffered losses, reacted similarly. Captain Robert Anderson, one of the pilots who flew that day, wrote in his memoirs, "We were the best, at least we thought we were. But on that day over Berlin, we learned humility. A single German pilot showed us that we still had much to learn." These statements show the respect that the American pilots had for their German opponents. It wasn't hate, it was recognition. Among warriors, Captain Mitchell, the American pilot who had described Barkhorn, met him in 1972 at a veterans reunion in Munich. They spoke for hours. Mitchell later recounted, "When I met him, I didn't see an enemy. I saw a man who had gone through the same thing as me, the same fears, the same losses, the same nightmares. War makes no distinctions between sides. It destroys everyone equally." The story of Barkhorn's 9 kills became part of the training program for fighter pilots worldwide, not just because of the number of kills, but because of the tactics. The way he used the strengths of his machine, exploited the weaknesses of the enemy, and always maintained situational awareness, became a textbook example. The Luftwaffe of 1945 was at its end. Fuel shortages, pilot shortages, spare parts shortages. Most of the pilots who flew in those last months had fewer than 50 flight hours. They were regularly shot down by the experienced American and British pilots, but a few, the experts, the veterans, fought on. They knew that the war was lost, but they flew anyway. for their comrades, for their homeland, for the honor. Barkhorn was one of those men. 127 kills before January 14th, 136 after, 136 enemy aircraft, 136 lives that he had taken. In his 1985 interview, he also spoke about that. "I don't like to think about it," he said. "Every aircraft had a pilot, a man with a family, with dreams, with a future, that I ended. In war, you do what you have to do. But that doesn't mean that you have to be proud of it." This honesty, this ability to self-reflect, distinguished the true experts from the braggarts. They knew what they had done, and they carried that burden for the rest of their lives. The technical innovations of the Luftwaffe in the last months of the war were remarkable. The Me-262, the first operational jet fighter, reached 540 miles per hour and was superior to every Allied fighter. The He-162 Volkjäger was to be mass-produced and reconquer the skies. The Do-335, with its unconventional push-pull propulsion, was the fastest propeller aircraft of the war. But these wonder weapons came too late, and in too few numbers. In January 1945, fewer than 200 Me-262s were operational. The fuel was barely enough for 2 missions per week. The experienced pilots who could have flown these machines had largely fallen. Young, inexperienced pilots were burned in jet fighters because they did not master the technology. The war had already been decided. Everyone knew it. But the German pilots kept flying. Barkhorn never flew a Me-262 in combat. Although he was trained on the type, he preferred his FW-190. "A machine I know is worth more than 10 that I don't," he once said. January 14th, 1945 was not only a special day for Barkhorn, it was a day that marked the end of the Luftwaffe as an effective fighting force. The losses were too high, the spare parts too scarce. The fuel almost exhausted. After that day, fewer and fewer German fighters flew. The Allied bomber streams could operate almost unhindered. But on that day, for 15 minutes, a single German pilot had shown what was still possible. 9 kills, 9 P-51 Mustangs, an achievement that is unforgotten to this day. These are not just statistics from dusty archives. These are the moments that decided the fate of nations. Real pilots, real fear, real consequences. These stories must never be forgotten. If these historical truths are important to you, then support with YouTube's Super Thanks, the golden heart below. Every Super Thanks allows me to spend weeks in archives, digitizing rare documents, interviewing last eyewitnesses. The story of Klaus Barkhorn is more than just a war account. It's the tale of a man who achieved the extraordinary in an inhuman situation. 9 confirmed kills in just 15 minutes. Against some of the world's best pilots, all while flying a damaged aircraft and running low on ammunition. And he survived. What enables a human being to achieve such feats? Is it mere talent, rigorous training, or something deeper, something perhaps immeasurable? The answer might lie in Barkhorn's own words. In that 1985 interview, he stated, "In the cockpit, I wasn't thinking about heroism. I was only thinking about survival and protecting my comrades. The rest was instinct." Instinct, a word that explains so much and yet so little. The kind of instinct that surfaces after a person has dedicated thousands of hours to training. An instinct that bypasses conscious thought and translates directly into action. The instinct that ultimately makes the difference between life and death. Barkhorn possessed that instinct, and on January 14th, 1945, for 15 minutes over Berlin, he showed the world just what a single man is capable of against a whole army. 9 kills, 15 minutes, 1 pilot. Berlin, 1945. This is the story of Klaus Barkhorn, a story of courage, of desperation, of camaraderie, and heartbreaking loss. A story that's absent from most history books, but one that deserves to be told. A story that reveals the remarkable things people can achieve when all seems lost. This story must never be forgotten. Not as a glorification of war itself, but as a testament to what ordinary people can accomplish under extraordinary circumstances. Barkhorn wasn't a hero by choice. He was a man simply doing his duty, in a time when duty often meant certain death. If you have family members who served in the Luftwaffe or have stories from that era, please share them in the comments section below. Every memory shared is a memory that is never truly lost. These stories connect us to our past and teach us the profound things people are capable of when everything is on the line.